The village was already gone when Marion arrived. Not gone in the dramatic sense. No smoldering ruins, no ash-swept fields, but gone in the way a whisper fades from memory. Quietly, with nothing left to hold it in place. The road to Calder's End was long, unpaved, and never truly marked on any map that Marion trusted. The taxi driver had let her off 5 miles out, claiming engine trouble. He didn't wait for her to protest, just muttered something about too much fog in the spine, and drove off with a speed that didn't match his earlier excuses. She walked the rest of the way with her duffel slung across one shoulder and her boots steadily swallowing the silence between trees. The trees, she noticed, had changed. They were taller than anything that should have grown this far north, twisting oaks and black pines that leaned inward as if trying to hear her thoughts. Their trunks bore no names, no carvings from bored teenagers or passing hikers. Just ridges like scars and patches of bark that shimmered faintly when caught in the low, sickly light of dusk. By the time she reached the crest of the road, the house was already waiting for her. Gray stone, 3 stories, no lights, no smoke, but not empty, not in the way Marion feared. She approached slowly, boots crunching over gravel that didn't echo. The gravel was bone-colored, finer than it should have been. At the front gate, she paused. An iron arch stood over the entrance, warped with age, rust lacing through its veins. A name had once been hammered across its frame, but only a few letters remained. Ulters. The gate creaked open without a touch. The house loomed, and somewhere within its walls, something shifted. Not moved, not walked. Shifted, like a weight redistributing itself. Like breath filling a long deflated lung. Marion stepped forward. Each footfall was deliberate, measured. The air smelled like rain, though it hadn't rained in days. The door opened before she could knock. It swung inward with no sound, revealing a wide entrance hall of wood-paneled walls and dusty chandeliers, all suspended in a silence that didn't belong to the living. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her, not slammed, not even shut, just decided. The temperature dropped slightly, enough for her to feel it in her fingers, enough for her breath to barely show. And from somewhere up the staircase, a long, narrow stair that wound into the upper floors like a spine, she heard it, the soft, deliberate click of a chair rocking. Once, twice, then silence. She turned toward the parlor, a fireplace long dead, a couch draped in canvas, a painting on the far wall, its face smeared with dust but oddly preserved. She could make out the silhouette of a woman, sitting, smiling faintly. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a child with no face. Marion blinked. The smile in the painting widened just slightly, but the brush strokes never changed. She didn't move closer. Instead, she reached into her coat, withdrew the folded letter, and opened again, though she had memorized every word. Dear Marion, you are the last. It is time you return to Calder's End. The house remembers what you've forgotten. Do not stay past the 15th night. And whatever you hear behind the cellar door, do not answer. The letter bore no stamp, no return address, only a red wax seal at the bottom, pressed with the imprint of a threaded eye. She folded it, slipped it back into her coat. A gust of wind passed through the house, but no windows were open. She turned toward the stairs. The rocking stopped. Then just once, she heard a voice from above. A woman's voice, tired, familiar, almost her own. Welcome home, Marion. Marion stood at the base of the staircase, the voice still echoing faintly through the rafters. It hadn't been loud, hadn't even sounded like speech. Exactly, more like an impression, a thought spoken aloud just long enough to be heard, then swallowed by the silence of the upper floor. The stairs stretched upward, winding around a central shaft of darkness. No light fixtures, no sconces, only the pale outline of each step as it disappeared into the dim above. She didn't climb. Not yet. Instead, Marion turned left into what must have once been the drawing room. The carpet was dense with dust. Her boots left clear tracks behind her. The curtains had been drawn, though no one had lived here in years. At least, not according to the papers she had sifted through. Not according to the woman at the library in Millwright Hollow who'd whispered, "You're going up there?" Thought that place was condemned after what happened to the last ones. Marion hadn't asked what the last ones meant. She didn't want to know. Not yet. The drawing room was lined with bookshelves, tall, carved oak, some still filled with aging tomes. Others lay collapsed, their shelves splintered under the weight of forgotten pages. One in particular caught her eye, a journal, bound in cracked green leather, half hidden beneath a fallen lamp. She reached for it. Dust stirred, but no weight left the book. It had the stillness of something that hadn't been touched in decades, and the weight of something that didn't want to be. She opened it. The pages inside were filled with sketches. Not writing, not notes, just rooms. Dozens of them, all drawn with uncomfortably precise lines, labeled in a faint hand. Guest room A, 7 creaks of window, no reflection. Nursery, wallpaper peels if watched directly. North study, mirror hums between midnight and 12:06. And on the last page, cellar, do not knock. The final sketch wasn't a room at all. It was a spiral, drawn over and over, layer upon layer, until the graphite pressed so deep into the paper it torn through. Marion closed the journal. The room had grown colder. A chair near the fireplace creaked. She turned. Nothing moved, but the dust on the seat was gone. Only in the center, as if someone had just stood up or was still sitting unseen. She stepped back into the hallway. The main staircase loomed again. Something on the upper floor shifted. Deliberate, rhythmic. The sound of feet pacing, but far too slow. 1 step. Wait. 2. Wait. Like someone was being led, or was leading something else. Marion climbed. Each step a small act of trust. Each breath slower than the one before. At the landing, the hallway yawned open to both sides. She turned right, drawn by instinct. A door stood ajar ahead, faint light leaking out in thin golden ribbons. Inside a bedroom, her childhood bedroom, the same faded wallpaper with wildflower patterns, the same window that had once rattled during storms, the same bed, small, low to the ground, still made with the quilt her grandmother had sewn. She stepped inside. The floor groaned in recognition. On the nightstand, a doll, faceless, its head a bundle of yarn, its dress stitched with the name ML. She didn't remember owning it, but her fingers trembled when she picked it up. It was still warm. From outside the room, down the hall, something let out a long, low breath. Not human, not bestial. Something that had waited too long. And just for a moment, the flowered wallpaper beside the bed twitched, as if something beneath the plaster had exhaled in tandem. Marion backed away slowly. The hallway was darker now. The bedroom door creaked shut behind her. No wind, no hands, just a house remembering how to be lived in. The hallway ran longer than it should. She walked, following a thread of instinct that had always served her best. Some quiet animal sense in her chest that tugged at her collarbone when things turned wrong. And this hallway was very wrong. It stretched in defiance of proportion, windowless and lined with identical doors. They had no numbers, no labels, no knobs, only small indentations in the wood. Crescent-shaped grooves, smoothed by years of quiet hands. As she passed each one, the air thickened, not with heat or scent, but with something else. Weight. The pressure of being watched without eyes, of being expected without request. Then she saw it. The red door. Unlike the others, this one was marked. A vertical strip of fading scarlet, running down the middle like dried blood. It shimmered faintly in the dim, as though the paint were still fresh. She stepped closer. The groove on this door was different, deeper, carved, not worn, and filled with something black and waxy, like candle residue that had never melted. A sound emerged behind it, soft, wet, like pages turning underwater. She leaned in. The moment her ear came close, she heard it, a voice, small, childlike. You left me in the walls. She recoiled. The hallway behind her had changed. The way back was shorter now, the air colder. A shape stood at the far end, too thin, too tall, its face masked in shadow, no features, no eyes. But its hand, It raised its hand slowly, not in threat, not in warning, but in greeting, like it knew her, like it had missed her. Marion turned and opened the red door. It resisted, only for a second. Then it sighed, like lungs long unused. The room beyond was not a room. Not really. It was a corridor, narrow, lit by a single swinging bulb, its cord twisted and wet. The floor was covered in salt. White, uneven mounds like snow shaped by old feet. The walls were made of mirrors, but none of them reflected her. Each one showed a different room, a different moment. A child in the garden, pulling the wings off a fly. A man seated at the dining table, weeping over an empty plate. A woman brushing her hair, though her reflection moved just behind her. A figure in a rocking chair, facing a wall, laughing without sound. She passed each image slowly, unsure if she was being led or simply pulled by the house's memory. Then one mirror, larger than the rest, flickered and showed her, not present-day Marion, younger, 9, maybe 10, kneeling in this very hallway, drawing circles in the salt, singing under her breath, once to the mouth that told a lie, twice to the eye that saw it die, 3 for the knock that comes too late, 4 for the girl who seals the gate. The child in the mirror looked up, right at her, and smiled. Her mouth was stitched shut. The bulb above flickered. The salt shifted. Something had stepped into it. Behind her, she turned slowly, heart suddenly drumming in her throat. There was nothing, but a trail of bare, wet footprints had appeared in the salt. Small, child-sized, leading from the open red door, up behind her, and into the mirror where the stitched girl sat. The bulb buzzed louder. The air shivered, and all the mirrors on the right wall began to weep. Then rivulets of blood, sliding slowly down the glass. The reflection of the stitched girl raised a hand and pointed downward, at Marion's feet, where the salt had written itself into words. "Welcome back, gatekeeper." Marion didn't move. The salt shifted again beneath her boots, tracing out letters in slow, halting strokes, like a child learning to write in cursive. The words were crude but unmistakable. The gate opened once. You were the latch. You bled it shut, and then she's still behind it. The mirror directly across from her, once flickering, was now black. No reflection, no image, just a void framed in glass. Then it cracked. A hairline fracture, no sound. Then another. By the time the third one appeared, Marion was already stepping backward, her eyes fixed on a trail of wet footprints in the salt. The child-shaped presence hadn't returned through the door. It had stepped into her reflection and vanished. The salt trembled, then scattered outward violently as if caught in a sudden wind. But there was no wind, no draft, just the breath of the house, shifting in rhythm with her pulse. She turned and ran, back down the mirror corridor, through the red door, into the hall that should have ended. But now, it didn't. Where the hallway should have turned into a stairwell, there was now a narrow passage leading downward, sloping into shadow. The smell changed. Salt gave way to iron. And beneath that, something older. A scent like dried parchment soaked in mildew. She should have stopped, turned back, left the key, the house. The name called her behind her. But Marion had been carrying the weight of not knowing for years. This place, this impossible, breathing, dreaming house. New things she'd buried so deep, even she no longer felt their shape. So she descended. The walls grew tighter with every step. The air thinner. Her thoughts heavier. At the bottom of the slope, the passage opened into a low-ceilinged anteroom lit by the amber glow of a single candle. The candle sat atop a box. Not wood, salt, a box sculpted entirely from pressed salt bricks, held together with strands of dark, stiff thread. The candle flickered. Behind the salt box, the walls bore carvings. Not painted, not drawn, scratched, dozens, maybe hundreds of identical phrases, layered over one another until the lines blurred. She moved closer, narrowing her gaze to read them. The teeth were never hers. The teeth were never hers. The teeth, over and over, line after line, the same message. Above it all, burned into the arch of the doorway she just passed through. Room 9. Marion felt something shift behind her sternum. A tension, like a memory beginning to pull. She touched the salt box. Cold. Too cold. She felt around the back, and her fingers grazed something metal. A key. A third one. This one was jagged. Teeth like broken glass. Its handle warped, as if the key had been pulled halfway through fire. She held it tight. Another carved line below the key's resting place read, "This one opens the mouth." A breath passed behind her ear. A whisper. She didn't catch it. She turned quickly, candle in hand. The passage behind her had changed. It now led upward again, but at the top was a door. Old, swollen from age, unmarked, except for a line of tiny teeth nailed into its wood in the shape of a smile. Her stomach turned. She stepped up. The smile didn't move, but the keyhole in the center of the grin was unmistakable. She raised a new key, paused. Her ears rang. She thought she heard a voice, faint, muffled, like someone pressing their mouth against the floorboard from below. "Marion," she froze. "Don't let her out again." The voice was young, female, threaded with fear. She looked down. The salt from the box had begun to seep through the stairs, cracking them, forming words once more. "You sealed her for a reason. Don't unpick your own stitch." Marion lowered the key. The house didn't breathe, didn't shift. It simply waited. And below her feet, something began to knock. 3 times. Slow, patient, hungry. The knocking stopped. Marion didn't breathe for nearly a full minute. The key still hovering near the grin-shaped hole in the swollen wood. The teeth embedded into the door had grown damp, as if they had just been inside someone's mouth. She took a step back, and the floor gave a low creak that sounded almost like a sigh. The candle flickered violently, then died. She was plunged into darkness, but the house didn't vanish. Its shape simply shifted. From somewhere beyond the grin door, she heard a sound not meant for human ears, like laughter, but wrong. Too thin, too tight, like a violin bow dragged across a jawbone. And underneath it, breathing, not the slow, mournful kind of a resting thing. No, this was eager. Too close, too still. She turned on instinct and retreated down the stair passage again. But it wasn't there. The salt room, the scratched messages, the corridor of mirrors, all gone. Now, there was only the hall. Flat, black, lined with doors that were not doors. She moved cautiously, one hand grazing the wall for stability. It was warm, beating, a rhythm, low and slow, like a massive heart buried behind the paneling. A few paces in, she reached a bend. There was no light, no natural sound, only the quiet hush of old which shifting beneath its own weight. And then a whisper, very close, behind her. "Did you take the key from her teeth?" She turned. No one, but something was waiting in the air. Thick, damp. Marion began to run, blind, half-hunched, gripping the useless brass key in one hand as the other swept the wall for a latch, a handle, anything. The next turn came suddenly, and with it, a light, a dim orange glow spilling from beneath the door ahead, the only door that looked untouched, unbent, unsmiling. She reached it, chest heaving. There was a plaque, tarnished, nearly unreadable. She wiped at it with her sleeve. The words came through faintly. Room 9, not painted, not engraved. Sewn, threaded directly into the metal. Small crisscrosses of dark red cord forming perfect serif letters. She froze, didn't touch the handle, because she remembered it now, not from her childhood, from dreams, recurring ones, from that strange sense of displacement she'd felt her entire life. The feeling of having misplaced something essential inside herself and never being able to look in the right place to find it. This was that place, the place she forgot each time she woke. She whispered to herself, without meaning to, "I buried her here." The door opened, not wide, just enough. A sliver of scent slipped out, earth, metal, damp cloth, and beneath it, flowers, dried violets, faint, sweet. She pushed it open farther. Inside, a single bed, an iron frame cot, a wooden desk, and on the far wall, a painting. Not one she remembered, but her name was written on the frame. Marion E. Calder. The painting showed a field of snow, an empty swing, a white shape beneath a tree, and something watching from the edge of the canvas. Half shadowed, a tall figure with no face, only teeth strung along a wire where the eyes should be. She turned from it quickly and stepped into the room. The door closed behind her, not slammed, sewn shut. She heard the thread pull tight behind her, stitch by invisible stitch. She reached for the desk. On it, an open journal. The pages were empty until she touched it. Then words began to appear, written in her own handwriting. You came back because you knew the stitches wouldn't hold forever. You thought locking her in the room was enough. But you forgot one thing. She knows how to sew, and she's been making herself a new body. Marion tried to pull her hand away, but it was stuck. The ink had risen from the page, wrapping around her fingers like wet thread, holding her there. And from the corner of the room, the swing creaked, though there was no swing, no tree, only the sound, and the slow, grating whisper from beneath the floorboards. One more stitch, Marion, and I'll wear you whole. The ink coiled around Marion's fingers like vines, tightening with every heartbeat. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It was intentional. Thread with purpose, like a spider lashing prey to a web spun from its own forgotten name. She jerked her arm back. The ink snapped. Her fingers came away sticky, smudged with lines and half-formed letters she didn't recognize. But worse than the ink was the sound beneath her skin, a faint ticking, like a spool of thread unwinding inside her bones. She stepped back from the journal. The pages closed themselves, one after another. The paper slapped softly until the cover shut. A single word now burned on its front. Borrowed. She turned toward the room's corner, the one she hadn't looked at when she entered. Something sat there now. A chair, wooden, rocking slowly, and in it, a figure, small, dressed in a dark, child-sized smock stitched with silver trim. A porcelain mask covered its face, cracked diagonally across one cheek, revealing nothing beneath. The mask bore no eyes, no mouth, only a faint row of red thread in the shape of a smile. The figure's arms rested stiffly at its sides. Its hands were cloth. Its fingers, needles. One hand slowly rose and pointed at Marion's chest. A thread uncoiled from her sternum. Thin, clear, it stretched forward like a spider's silk and touched the figure's fingertip. The smile deepened, and then it spoke. Not aloud. Inside her, a voice threaded directly into her memory, woven through the places she never dared visit. You thought you could leave her behind, but you wore her long before you came back. The doll rose. It moved like a puppet yanked by strings soaked in oil, jerking forward, step by step, its joints clicking softly like teeth chattering in a cold wind. Marion stepped back, but the room had changed. No door, no corners, only one wall now, covered in dolls. Hundreds of them, all hanging by threads from hooks in the ceiling. Each one stitched with a single word carved into their chests. Liar, daughter, hollow, gatekeeper, spare, her. Their button eyes followed her as she moved. One by one, they began to sway, then twist, then twitch. The sound of 100 threads pulling tight in unison filled the air like breathing fabric. The porcelain-faced doll stopped 2 steps from her. It raised both hands and placed them gently on Marion's shoulders. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. The thread from her chest had begun to tug. Her breath came shallow. Behind the mask, something clicked, and in a voice that sounded like it had been copied from her mother's lullabies and played backward through radio static, it whispered, "Do you remember the stitch you tied to her spine?" It didn't hold. The doll's hands opened. Needle fingers drew a pattern in the air. Not writing, not symbols. Sewing. And where the needle moved, thread appeared, floating, tight, golden. It formed a door in midair. Hung there, suspended by nothing. And beyond it, a corridor. Narrow, moving, throbbing with soft red light. Marian's thread pulled again. The door opened. The doll stepped aside, then spoke one last time. You can still unmake her, but you must remember what you did. Room 9 was only the beginning. The dolls on the wall began to hum. Soft, low, a tune she hadn't heard since childhood. 1 stitch for the body, 2 stitches for the soul, 3 for the girl you left in the wall. For make her whole, Marian stepped through the door thread, and the dolls began to rock. One by one, smiling, the threaded doorway sealed itself behind her, not with a slam or a stitch, but a shudder like the house exhaled and decided she was in now. Deeply in, the corridor ahead twisted like intestines. The walls breathed. Pale fabric stretched over bones of bent wood, pulsing faintly with each of her footsteps. The red light came from thin veins sewn into the ceiling, glowing softly with every breath the corridor took. They throbbed in rhythm, like a heartbeat she'd once known. Her heartbeat, at least it had been. Now it stuttered, skipped. Marian stepped carefully. The floor wasn't carpet, but padded linen, and every step to press into it like she were walking on a body wrapped in bandages. Occasionally, she felt something shift beneath her, something long, boneless. Following, she pressed forward. No end in sight, only more twists and folds and seams along the walls, some freshly stitched, others gaping open just enough to hint at the glisten of glass eyes and tiny teeth inside. On her left, the corridor split, a narrow alcove with another mirror. This one wasn't cracked or bleeding, just clean, reflective. Marian approached it cautiously, but her reflection was gone again. In its place, a table set for dinner, silver cutlery, plates stacked high with raw wool, and glasses brimming with thick, black water. A single chair, a single guest. The reflection showed the back of the guest's head, sewn into place with thick butcher's twine where the neck met the collar. The guest turned slowly, and it was her, not the girl, not the woman, something in between, eyes missing, mouth replaced with buttons. She reached toward the glass, and the reflection did the same. But her hand never met glass. It sank into mirror like water, and as it passed through, the wool on the table began to rise, threads lifting into the air, twisting toward her fingers, forming a needle, then words. They knit themselves into mirror's surface, quivering, suspended. You broke the first seal. There are 2 left. Unstitch, or she wakes with your name. The wool fell limp. The needle dropped. Her reflection vanished. She turned away. The corridor tightened. As she moved forward, voices began to whisper from behind the seams of the walls. Children, dozens of them, not crying, just repeating. Not to her, to the house. We remember where she was buried. We remember what Marian did. We remember the seam at the base of her throat. A seam at her own throat itched. She touched it. There was nothing, and yet she could feel the memory of thread. The corridor ended abruptly in a wooden door. No frame, no handle, only a circle drawn on its surface in what looked like chalk, and a line of text embroidered into the floor below it. Say what you sewed, or stay inside her. A test. Marian stared at the chalk circle. Something about it tugged at her memory, like a cold finger on the back of her neck. And then, faintly, she heard her own voice again. Not aloud. Inside her mouth. Inside the hollow of her tongue. It whispered. She was a girl when I made her quiet. I used the thread from my father's coat, and I set her name into the needle so she would forget it. The door opened. No sound. Just absence. She stepped through and found herself not in another room, but in a garden, dead, overgrown. The air was gray with mist, the trees leafless. Swing sets creaked in windless silence. She recognized it, the garden from the painting in room 9. A white figure knelt beneath a tree, motionless, face down, its back marked with a long seam, partially opened. From within it, something squirmed, still forming, still becoming. Marian stepped forward. The earth pulsed beneath her feet. A voice rose from the roots. When you sewed her shut, you used the wrong name. You used your own. The sky over the garden had no sun, just a low, heavy light, like dawn pressed through gauze. The trees swayed without wind, and the swing creaked from some internal rhythm that made Marian's bones ache. She stood staring at the figure beneath the tree. The white gown was soaked through with soil and thread. Its back, still partially unstitched, flexed subtly like something was shifting just beneath the skin of it, or trying to come out. The seam itself pulsed, slow and warm. Marian's name hung in the air now, not spoken but suspended, an afterimage behind her eyes, stitched into her breath. You used the wrong name. The voice that had said it was gone, but the meaning lingered. The ground sloped downward into garden's core. Moss grew thick over crumbled stone markers, names long since erased. This place had once been a grave of sorts, but not for bodies, for identities, for things people wanted to forget, and for the ones they sowed that forgetting into. Marian took another step toward the figure under the tree. The seam in its back twitched. She paused. A faint sob echoed, not from the figure, but from beneath the earth. A child's gasp of confusion. The desperate kind that only happens when someone wakes in the dark and doesn't remember what name they used to cry out for help. She crouched low beside the body. Closer now. She could see that the thread wasn't ordinary. It was hair, woven tightly long, dark strands pulled so taut they had begun to slice into the gown and the skin beneath it. A memory surfaced. A pair of small hands. A girl's mouth, stitched silent. A lullaby sung through clenched teeth. Marian touched the seam. It was warm, alive. At her touch, the hair thread split slightly, and a word escaped from within, not in sound, in thought. Marian, she gasped. The figure moved, only slightly. A tremble in the shoulders, a twitch in one heel. Its head turned, just a few degrees, enough to expose the edge of its cheek, where more thread held its lips closed. Her lips, the resemblance was imperfect, but unmistakable. This was the girl she had sewn shut, the one she left in the walls. But also not quite. This thing had grown, taken on parts of her, voice, name, shape, like a costume made from memory. And now it was waking. The ground beneath Marian shifted. Something was rising. Hands, small, dozens, reaching up from the dirt, pale fingers brushing her boots, not grabbing, offering. Each one held something different. A needle, long and curved like a fish hook. A child's tooth with a thread looped through the root. A paper mask smeared with ink. A slip of fabric with her name burned into it. A small mirror, cracked. One hand held nothing but a single drop of blood, suspended above the palm, quivering. Marian hesitated, then reached for the mirror. The moment she touched it, the garden went silent. Even the swing stopped. The reflection was dim, but what she saw wasn't her face. It was the inside of her mouth, and in place of a tongue, a tightly folded note. She opened her mouth instinctively. She felt nothing there, but the mirror still showed it. The note, moving, unfolding, revealing a message written in wet, red strokes. She remembers your first lie, and she's almost done sewing it shut. The reflection changed. Now it showed the girl beneath the tree, fully sitting up now, eyes still sewn shut, but twitching beneath the stitches, the thread around her lips pulling tighter, straining, fraying. Marian felt her chest tighten. The threads had run through her arms, her ribs, her spine. Thread she thought had faded, pulled taut. She fell to one knee. The dirt beneath her cracked, and the child's hand began to sink back down, slowly. Still offering, still waiting. From behind her came a sound. Footsteps, soft, bare. She turned. No one there, but the swing was moving again. Not creaking now, laughing. A quiet, low giggle, like a girl behind a door, watching someone try to open it the wrong way. And on the wind, that same rhyme returned. 1 stitch for the mouth, 2 stitches for the lie, 3 for the gate that opened wide, for the thread that never dies. The figure beneath the tree stood up, her back still open. Hair thread unraveling like ribbon from a gift no one wanted to open. She turned toward Marian, arms hanging at her sides. her face still hidden by stitches, but her mouth, that seam was nearly gone. Only a few loops of hair left, and behind them, teeth, too many, too small, all smiling. The girl's stitched mouth smiled without moving. The few remaining strands of hair thread twitched across her lips, pulled taut and quivering like violin strings seconds before the bow. The teeth behind them weren't meant for eating. They were meant for remembering. Each tiny tooth was carved, not grown, with faint runes etched into the enamel, like the grooves of a phonograph needle. They turned slowly, silently, as though whispering stories not yet told, stories Marion had buried. She took an involuntary step backward, the girl's head tilted, as if recognizing her, or tasting her. Her stitched eyes fluttered beneath the threads. The wind in the garden changed. No longer air, a breath. From behind Marion, she turned and saw a wall, not stone, not brick, a wall made of cloth, stretched tight over hundreds of silhouettes, pressed hands, silent mouths bulging against the fabric like fetal things caught in thin plastic, trying to scream through memory. Then the cloth breathed inward, all of it as one, and exhaled through the trees. A single word, Marion. The girl beneath the tree took a step forward. Her feet did not disturb the soil. The moss parted for her like pages, and where she walked, the grass unwound, long strands of green splitting into thread, coiling around her ankles and trailing behind like trained fabric soaked in grief. Marion held her ground, barely. The mirror in her hand vibrated faintly. Its cracked surface showed no reflection anymore, only thread endlessly spinning, faster now, tangling into a knot too dense to unpick. From the back of her throat came a taste, bitter like copper dye cloth, and a word, not hers. It forced itself out before she could stop it. Elson. The girl stopped moving. That was her name, the one Marion had sealed away inside the seam, the one she had given up in exchange for silence. The last thread across the girl's mouth snapped, and she spoke, but not with sound, with thread. Words unraveled from her mouth, weaving themselves into the air like cursive written in real time. You traded me for quiet. You left me to rot in memory. But I remembered how to sew, and I made myself out your forgetting. Marion took a step forward, her own spine locking tight. With each movement, she could feel the stitches there again. A long seam from her nape to her hips. Old, invisible, but never healed. She could feel it now, tugging, unpicking. Elson opened her eyes. The stitches had fallen away, but no eyes waited beneath them, just wounds, shaped like buttons, deep, neat, hollow. She saw without seeing. She looked into Marion, and the thread coiled in her veins responded. You lied when you said you'd come back. You lied when you took my name. You said I was a sin, but I was the seal. The wall cloth behind Marion groaned. 100 fists pounded against it from the inside. Not angry, begging. Muffled voices bled through the weave. Don't open it. Don't let her speak again. Don't wear her name. She remembers the sound of the gate. The moss at Marion's feet began to blacken. From the soil, a hand emerged. Not a child's, not a woman's. Something made. It held a needle the length of a knife, and wrapped around it a long red thread, frayed and smoking at both ends. Elson reached for it. The needle leapt from the hand into hers like a trained thing. She raised it slowly and pointed at Marion. The thread unraveled into the air, forming one final phrase. You can wear the silence, or you can wear me. Marion's pulse stuttered. The mirror in her hand split completely, shattering into threads instead of glass. They pulled themselves into her skin, embedding like veins. The world went quiet, except for the stitch song, sung now by the wall. 1 stitch to bind the breath inside. 2 for the name you try to hide. 3 to seal what cannot die. 4 for the thread that knows a lie. Elson stepped forward. The needle gleamed, and the seam in Marion's spine began to open. The seam down Marion's back gave like old cloth. She didn't scream. Couldn't. The moment it opened, a soundless breath escaped her mouth. A windless exhale made of memories torn loose and trailing like torn paper. Her legs buckled, her hands scraped the moss-covered ground, and all at once, her body became a house of many locked rooms. And Elson had the key. The needle in Elson's hand pulsed red. Its thread stretched toward Marion's open seam like a living thing. Seeking, slithering, ready to sew something new into what was left of her. Marion forced herself to crawl backward, but the garden had changed again. The stone markers were gone. The swings had dissolved. The sky above was stitched shut. Gray linen pulled across the horizon like the lid of a box, and the walls were closer now. The cloth barrier that had once surrounded the garden was tightening, collapsing inward like lungs exhaling their final breath. Elson followed, slowly, no longer walking, gliding, as if the very ground unraveled for her feet. Her eyes, those hollow, unblinking button wounds, remained fixed on Marion. They weren't angry. They were expectant, as if she were not punishing Marion, but fulfilling a promise. I remember the thread you used. Her voice came again, not spoken, but woven into Marion's hearing. It was from Mother's coat. You said it would keep me warm, but it kept me quiet. Marion reached behind her instinctively, trying to press the seam closed, but the flesh no longer obeyed. It had become soft, loose, unheld. Her body was no longer hers alone. Inside her, she could feel shapes waking. Tiny hands, tiny mouths, all of them whispering, "We are your forgettings. We are your stitches undone." Elson knelt beside her. The needle hovered above Marion's spine, and in that moment, Marion saw what Elson had become. No longer just the little sister she left behind. No longer only the memory she sealed away, but a garment made of untruth, stitched from silences, woven from guilt, and now ready to be worn. "If I sew myself back in," Elson whispered, "I'll never have to forget again. But neither will you." The needle pierced skin, not pain, pressure. A sound bloomed behind Marion's eyes. The hum of thread dragged through flesh. The first stitch pulled tight. Her mouth opened, and from it fell hair, long black strands, wet with breath. She gagged, coughed, but more came, thread after thread, each one pulled from some impossible place inside her. Elson gathered them, smiled. Another stitch. 3 for the girl you left on the wall. Another, for to make her whole. The world dimmed. The garden was gone. The walls were gone. Only Marion, the needle, and the sound of weaving. She felt herself unraveling, not dying, being rewritten. Something rose in her. A word, a thought. No, not her own. Elson's. But she grabbed it, held it, and before the final stitch could be tied, she whispered, "I never named you Silence." Elson froze. Marion reached up, touched her sister's hand, and saw it, the real thread, the first one, thin and gold, running from Elson's chest to her own. A loop, not a tether. A mirror. They hadn't just been one sealing the other. They had been each other's lock. Marion grasped the golden thread and pulled. It didn't break. It sang, a note high and pure, like bone chimes in winter wind. The stitches in Marion's spine ripped open, not with pain, but with clarity. Elson's eyes widened. Her needle dropped. All around them, the world began to unweave. The stitched sky tore open. The air sucked backward. The walls folded inward like the end of a curtain call. Elson whispered, "If you take me back in, I'll always be part of you." Marion looked down at the last stitch. Thread half-tied. She took it, looped it once more, then tied it, not to seal but to connect. A thread across time, a name shared. "You're not Silence," Marion whispered. "You're my voice I was afraid to hear." The world split, and Marion fell, not into darkness, but into the sound of her own breath. Finally whole again, Marion woke on wooden floorboards, not the soft soil of the stitched garden, not the padded corridor of living linen. Real wood, cold beneath her palms, fragrant with damp age and dust, the smell of someplace old and awake. Above her, the ceiling was unfamiliar, sloped, mottled with water stains. The ribs of exposed beams gave the space the feel of a rib cage. A narrow attic, lit only by soft gray light spilling through a cracked dormer window. Her breath steamed in the air. It was morning, or what passed for it in Calder's End. She sat up. Her back hurt, but not like before. There was weight there now. A presence, not intrusive, not painful, but undeniably part of her. She reached around, trembling, and felt the seam. Still closed, but it was no longer a wound. It was a mark, smooth as healed scar tissue, raised only slightly, as though her skin had remembered its shape. No thread remained. No needle, just a hum, faint but familiar, like a thread humming in stillness, waiting to be pulled, but only gently, only when needed. The attic was quiet. Dust floated in long, lazy strands of light, and somewhere far below, a clock chimed once, low and hollow, as though striking not the hour but a memory. She stood slowly and turned. Behind her was a mirror, full length, gilt frame, old enough for the silver to have mottled across the glass like lichen. She approached it cautiously, not because she feared what she would see, but because, for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't sure who she would see. Her reflection looked back. It was her, but not only her. Her eyes held something deeper, softer, and just over her left shoulder, barely visible, a faint outline, a shape of a girl. Not threatening, not angry, just present, watching, sharing the same breath. Elson, still with her, not sewn inside, not caged, integrated. Oh! The air shifted. Behind her, a trapdoor in the floor creaked open slowly on its own. She turned. There were no stairs, just a rope ladder descending into darkness. But the air rising up smelled different than before. Less dust, less mildew, more earth, like the smell of garden soil right before rain. She stepped to the edge and looked down. There was a glow, amber, flickering. Firelight? She descended. The ladder creaked, but held. At the bottom, she stepped into a narrow hallway paneled in dark wood. Along the walls, portraits hung, but not in frames, embroidered. Every face stitched into the fabric that lined the corridor. Eyes made from glass beads, mouths sealed with thread. Some of the faces she recognized, blurred in memory, but real, distant relatives, neighbors, those who had once spoken too loudly about the house on Calder's End and had disappeared into quietness. Each tapestry whispered as she passed, not with words, with names. Her name, Elson's name, but others, too, many others. We are all the ones who were sewn. We are all the ones who stitched. We are the thread and the needle, and we are not done remembering. The hallway ended in a door, wooden, heavy, no knob, only a needle, set vertically into the center, point down, as if inviting her to pull it free. She reached out. Her fingers trembled, but not with fear, with understanding. This door didn't lead back into the house. It led beneath it, to the final room, the place the thread had always been pulling her toward. She touched the needle, and it was warm. It slid free like breath from lips. The door unlatched, and behind it, stairs, worn smooth by generations of footsteps, by memories too heavy to be buried, and too important to be spoken aloud. She descended. The flame light grew stronger, the air thicker, and at the bottom, a room, round, lined with shelves. And on those shelves, dolls, not the twisted ones from the mirror corridor, not stitched horrors. These were old, beloved, mended. Each wore a tag. Each tag held a name. Some she knew. Some were hers. Some were Elson's. Some were not yet written. And in the center of the room, a table. Upon it, a single doll lay unfinished, its chest open, its hands soft, its face blank, waiting. There was a note pinned beside it, written in delicate script, for when someone else forgets who they are. Used carefully, Marion stepped forward, and the hum returned. The thread inside her began to spin again, not to pull her apart, but to remind her how to mend. The round room felt warmer than anywhere else in the house. There was a stillness in the air Not stagnant, but reverent, like the hush inside a chapel before prayer. The dolls on the shelves did not move, but their presence pressed gently against Marian's senses, not like eyes watching, but like hands resting lightly on her shoulders. She stood before the unfinished doll on the table. It lay on a square of deep blue cloth. Its body was soft but unstuffed, its limbs stitched but limp. The blank face bore neither features nor fear, only openness. The needle she had taken from the door still rested in her palm, but now, as she looked down, it had changed. The metal had darkened to a rich, warm bronze, and a single strand of golden thread had appeared already looped through the eye. The thread pulsed faintly with light, as though it carried breath instead of blood. The note beside the doll rustled, the ink shimmered, and a new line wrote itself beneath the old message. Not all stitches are cages. Some are songs. Marian touched the doll's chest gently. The fabric had been left loose. A flap open where the heart would go. Not a mistake. An invitation. The thread inside her stirred. She felt Elson again, not as a separate entity, but as a presence within her chest, woven through memory and marrow, and others too, softer voices, quieter ones, all those she had tried to forget, all those she had silenced, not erased, just waiting. The needle twitched in her hand, guiding itself. She began to sew, one loop at a time, each stitch slow, deliberate, and as she did, words began to surface in her mind, not thoughts, not memories, but verses. Simple, old, almost childish in rhythm, but heavy in weight. She heard her own voice whisper them aloud. 1 stitch for the waking, 2 for the name, 3 for the pieces no one could tame, 4 for the silence that taught her to hide, 5 for the opening left inside. The thread moved as if remembering the pattern itself. Her fingers knew what her mind had not yet caught up to. She wasn't making a new doll. She was restoring something. Someone. A girl whose name had been forgotten not just by others, but by herself. The doll's limbs twitched. Not unnaturally. Not eerily. Just like a child dreaming. The final stitch reached the chest again. The thread pulled taut, then disappeared into the fabric, as though it had always lived there. And then, a breath. Small, shallow. The doll's chest rose. Once, twice, a slow rhythm began, fragile, but steady. The blank face warmed slightly. The cloth changed tone as though touched by light. And then, without any fanfare, eyes opened. Not glass, not buttons, just softness, awareness. The doll turned its head slightly and looked at Marian. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to, because Marian remembered now. She remembered the first doll she'd ever made, at age 7. She remembered the whisper she'd given it as a name, Nell. She remembered the way she'd hidden Nell under the floorboards after her mother screamed at her for talking to it like it was real. And she remembered the ache when she'd gone back to retrieve her, only to find the board nailed shut, the space beneath empty. Elson hadn't stolen her. The house had. Marian reached out and lifted the doll gently into her arms. It was heavier than expected, weighted with memory. Nell blinked once, and smiled. Not like the others, not the sewn grins or two-stitch mockeries. This smile was simple, a moment of warmth in a house that had forgotten how to feel anything but echo. Behind her, the shelves shifted. One by one, the dolls on them bowed their heads. Threads unwound softly from their chests, thin strands of color drifting upward like steam. They weren't dying. They were releasing, letting go, returning what had been taken. Marian turned to the door. It was no longer wood. It was fabric, soft, heavy, velvet black, the kind of curtain you might pull before the final act. And on it, embroidered in white thread, was a single line. A house forgets nothing. But below it, another had appeared. But it can learn to forgive. She walked forward, Nell in her arms. The curtain parted. Beyond it, the stairwell. And at the top, faint morning light. Real morning. Sunlight, not flame. Warmth, not memory. The house no longer groaned. It sighed. And for the first time, Marian understood The house hadn't been haunted by what was in it. It had been haunted by what had been abandoned, and she had come home to carry it out. Marion emerged from the stairwell slowly, cradling the doll in her arms. Her feet touched the familiar floorboards of the Calder house's main hallway. Except now, they felt different. Not hostile, not hollow, expectant. She paused at the top of the stairs and looked back. The curtain was gone. The velvet folds that had once separated her from the memory-wrapped rooms below had vanished, leaving only blank wood and silence in their wake. The house was no longer hiding. It was listening. Light slanted through tall windows dusted with ash. Golden morning sun bled onto the faded wallpaper, showing details she hadn't noticed before. Stitched edges along the seams of the walls, like someone had quilted the house together from different lives. And for a second, she wondered, was it even built, or was it sewn into place? Stitched into this hill, this coastline, this family? Nell stirred in her arms. The doll's eyes opened again. Still no words. But Marion didn't need them. She descended the stairs. At the bottom, the sitting room awaited, exactly as it had been when she first arrived. Dust motes, cracked teacups, the smell of dead flowers. But now, the room pulsed gently with warmth, as though the fire that had long gone cold in the hearth had left behind a memory of itself. A single envelope sat on the mantel. It hadn't been there before. She approached and picked it up. Her name was stitched into the paper. Not ink, thread, thin silver silk, like moonlight woven across linen. She opened it with careful fingers. Inside, a single square of muslin fabric, and written upon it, in the same hand that had written all the threads before, she will forget again one day. All dolls do. But when she does, you will be the needle, and you will know how to sew her back. This time, stitch with your voice, not your silence. Beneath the message, a signature. E. Elson, or perhaps the house itself, or perhaps something older, something that lived inside every silence, every wall, every place children hid the parts of themselves they weren't allowed to keep. She folded the note and slipped it into her coat pocket. The house was still. No more creaks. No breath beneath the walls. No threads tugging at her spine. Just a door. The same one she had walked through when she arrived. The one she had locked behind her. The one she had feared would vanish if she looked away too long. It was open now. Not swinging. Not inviting. Just open. Nell's hand reached up, small fingers brushing Marion's collarbone. And for the first time, Marion felt the house behind her, not around her. No longer a maze. Now a memory. A part of her. Like Elson. Like the seam down her back. Like the words she had never dared speak aloud, until they stitched themselves into her breath. She stepped out into morning. The hill beyond was quiet. The sea below whispered. And behind her, the Calder house stood, not ruined, not waiting, simply there, whole, as she walked down the path. Nell's head nestled against her shoulder. Marion felt a small weight in her coat pocket shift. She reached inside and pulled out a spool of thread, the silver silk, still whole, still soft, and a needle, the same bronze needle she thought she'd left behind. A final stitch, perhaps a promise. She smiled, not because everything was over, but because now, if it began again, she would know what to do. 3 days passed. Marion did not speak of the house. She stayed in the small cottage on the edge of the village, the one the solicitor had arranged, from its kitchen window. Calder's Inn sat in profile atop the hill, its gray silhouette sharp against the mist like the prow of a ship too stubborn to sink. People did not come to check on her. No neighbors, no distant cousins, just letters, left on her doorstep in the early morning, always unsigned. Notes made from pressed parchment and dry petals, some with faint stitching across the edges, as though they'd been closed with thread and thought better of it. Nell remained with her, not in the way dolls stay with children, but like a kept thought, a thread wrapped loosely around her wrist, so you don't forget what the shape of your voice feels like when it sings. She didn't cry. Neither did Marion. There was peace, yes, but it was a peace that watched. At night, Marion dreamed of rooms she had not entered, rooms deeper than the house had shown, Places where forgotten dolls pace in silence, their seams too tight, their names worn thin by generations of whispered promises. Sometimes in the dream, they sat in circles. Sometimes they rocked slowly on threadbare chairs. And sometimes they stitched, not out of malice, but from habit, the way old houses breathe. On the fourth night, she woke near midnight. The window was open, though she had not opened it. Nell sat upright at the foot of the bed, her head turned toward the sea. No movement, no blinking, but not still either. A kind of listening that comes when something long quiet hears its name again. Marion sat up. The silver thread in her coat pocket had unwound slightly. It trailed on the floor like a thin path of moonlight, pointing, not toward the door, but toward the mirror, the one leaning against the wall, unused. She had avoided it since returning, not because she feared what she'd see, but because she feared who might be waiting behind it. Now, it called. She rose and crossed the room. The mirror was fogged, but only in the center, and behind that fog, something shifted. A hallway, faintly visible, walls lined with dolls, neatly placed quiet, asleep. At the far end, a table, empty, no doll, no fabric, just a note pinned to the wood. Marion leaned in, and for a breathless instant, the fog cleared. She read the words on the note. We forget again now. Someone will need to remember. Prepare the thread. Soon, another will come. The mirror dimmed. Only her reflection stared back, but in her own eyes, she saw it. Not her, not Elson, not Nell. A third face, not yet born into stitches, but soon to arrive. The spool of thread in her pocket pulsed faintly. Nell blinked once from the foot of the bed. No fear, just readiness. And Marion whispered into the air, quiet as a stitch drawn through skin. I will be the needle. The morning of the seventh day was still. The sea below Calder's End lay flat and unmoving, a pane of glass beneath a breathless sky. No gulls, no waves, only silence. The deep, expectant kind that arrives not with dread, but preparation. Marion rose before dawn. The thread had wound itself into her hand overnight, not tangled, not tight, simply placed, as if left by someone gently reminding her it's time. Nell remained asleep. She now rested in small cradle Marion had stitched herself, layered with fabric taken from an old coat. Scraps of curtain, a single ribbon once tied around her own hair as a child. Every piece had meaning. She left the door ajar, not because she was afraid Nell would leave, but because she knew one day soon someone would come looking for her. Outside, the wind had returned, but it did not moan. It sang, a low humming, barely audible, as though the hill itself was tuning a forgotten string, drawing breath into a throat that hadn't spoken in generations. Marion walked the long path up toward Calder's End. The sun barely breached the horizon, casting the sky in the pale copper of old thread. The house loomed ahead, not diminished, not cracked or crumbled. It was calm, waiting. The front door opened without touch. Inside, the entryway was brighter than it had ever been, not from sunlight. There were no lit windows, but from the absence of shadow. The house had been unstitched, unbound, but not emptied. Marion passed through the rooms, the parlor, the corridor of mirrors, the stairway to the attic. Each space greeted her not as a visitor, but as its own. A final hallway, narrow and unfamiliar, had appeared where none had been before. She stepped through it. The walls bore no portraits. The floor made no sound. And at the end, one last door. The same bronze needle as before waited on the wood. She didn't hesitate. She took it, threaded it with the silver silk she brought, and stepped inside. The room beyond was white, endless, the kind of white that doesn't reflect light, but memory. It was not empty. In the center stood a table. On it, fabric, uncut, untouched, unnamed, the beginnings of a doll. No face, no limbs, no past, just possibility. Marion placed the needle beside it. She did not stitch. Not this time. This doll would not be made by her hands. Not yet, because someone else would need to learn. The house would teach them, as it had taught her, and she would remain, not sewn into the walls, but sewn into the thread of the place itself. A breath, a hush, a whisper behind a mirror when a child forgets her name. As she turned to leave, the walls of the white room shimmered. Faint shapes emerged. All the girls, all the names, all the dolls who had ever remembered and ever been remembered. And standing just beyond them, smiling gently, Elsin, no longer stitched, no longer broken. She nodded once and vanished. Marion returned to the entrance hall, stepped out into the sunlight. The house stood behind her, tall, still, whole, not waiting, not watching, just there. She descended the hill. Nell would be waking soon, and someday someone else would arrive at Calder's End. They would hear the thread hum. They would forget and then remember, and Marion would be ready. She would not speak, but she would be the needle in their hand, the hum behind the door, the hand guiding the first stitch, not to bind, but to make whole again, because not all threads close wounds. Some open them so they can finally heal.